I've spent most of my life listening to engines instead of people. A V8 coughs like a smoker in the morning, an old Ford sings around 2,000 RPM, and a timing chain, when it's about to betray you, clicks the way bones do in winter. Those are languages I understand. Faith? I left that back in my mother's Bible, pressed between funeral programs and yellowed bulletin notes. By 52, I'd traded Sunday hymns for the metallic lullaby of wrenches and air ratchets in a little cinder-block shop, squatting on the edge of the Nevada desert. That night began the way all storms begin out here. Strange silence first. The desert holds its breath. Coyotes go quiet. Even the power lines seem to lean closer to whatever is coming. Heat gathered on my skin like a second shirt as I locked up the bay door and cut the lights. I stood under a sky so black it felt like it might tip over and swallow me, except for a bruise of cloud far to the east, pulsing with heat lightning, white veins under a skin of ink. Then the air changed. It shimmered. Not the way heat shimmers off a highway, but the way a tuning fork hums against bone. I felt it in my teeth. The ground thumped, a dull, low note that made the oil cans rattle on the shelf. A blue flare tore the horizon open, clean as a scalpel, and for half a heartbeat the desert became day, sagebrush burning with silver light, pebbles throwing long shadows. My own hands turned transparent, veins like map lines. I heard metal scream. It was not a car wreck's scream. I know that sound. It's chaos and glass and human panic. This was controlled, like steel being pulled through a throat that refused to yield. I grabbed the mag light, climbed into my pickup and gunned it toward the dry wash behind the shop. Dust chased me, then overtook me, then vanished in the wind that followed the flash. I found the crater by smell before I saw it. Hot ozone and something sweetish like copper and rainwater. The beam of my flashlight cut through rising heat. The thing lay there, half buried, tilted like a capsized boat. It wasn't smooth like the movies. It looked grown, not built. Panels that flowed into one another, seams like healed scars, a skin of brushed graphite shot through with faint veins that pulsed. Every pulse matched that tuning fork hum running through the ground and up into my chest. I should have run. That's what a sensible man does when the world refuses to be the world you know. Instead, I stepped closer, because for better or worse, I fix broken things. That's who I am. The surface was warm, not blistering. My light caught a ragged opening, not a hatch, not a door, more like a wound. And inside, movement. "Hello?" I said, because no matter what you think of yourself, when you stare into the mouth of the impossible, you become a child again, calling into a dark room. Something answered, not with sound, with presence, a pressure behind the eyes, like a headache blooming. Images arrived, quick as lightning, a hand extended, an engine diagram made of light, an ache sharp and clean, the color of winter. Fear, not mine, theirs. I slid into the torn cavity on elbows and knees, grease-stained jeans scraping on a floor that flexed, not like metal, not like plastic, something in between. The interior glowed from nowhere, a soft pearl color that grew brighter when I exhaled and dimmer when I held my breath, as if the craft were listening to me breathe. Wires, if you could call them that, hung like roots, weeping a fluid that hissed when it touched the air. And then I saw it, the occupant, humanoid. Yes. Familiar enough that my mind could hold it without breaking, unfamiliar enough to make my mouth go dry. The being was tall but folded small, one knee tucked under the other, hands, too elegant to be hands, pressed against its side, skin like moonlight on water, no visible mouth, eyes, if they were eyes, deep dark lenses that reflected me back the way a deep well reflects a slice of the sky. Silver fluid leaked between its fingers, pooling in a shallow bowl, formed by the ship itself, as if the craft had grown a cradle to catch its passengers' blood. I whispered, "You're hurt." because that's what you say when you meet suffering, no matter what shape it wears. The pressure behind my eyes sharpened, and the images returned. My workbench, my soldering iron, the red-handled crimper I keep in a coffee can, the stubborn alternator from a '72 Chevy I'd fought with that morning. The ship showed me my own tools, not words, pictures, feelings, a request gentle and desperate. "I'm not a doctor," I said, "but I can fix machines." The being tilted its head, curiosity or calculation, or maybe trust. The ship answered for it. Panels near the wound softened and peeled back, revealing a tangle of luminous strands pulsing out of sync. If you've ever listened to an engine that's missing one cylinder, you know the wrongness in your bones. This craft was misfiring. I crawled backward, heart punching my ribs, and ran to the truck. I loaded the toolbox like I'd done 1,000 times, but my hands shook in a way they never had, not even the day I buried my mother. I should have called someone. 911, the Air Force, the pastor I hadn't seen in 20 years. Instead, I drove back to the crater with a socket set and a flashlight between my teeth. Maybe it's foolishness that drives a man toward mystery. Maybe it's faith you don't know you still have. The desert wind rose, whispering through the yucca, carrying the faintest trace of rain. Above me the clouds pulsed again. Blue, then white, then something I have no name for. I climbed into the wound with my tools, and for the first time in a long time, I said a prayer without meaning to. Not words, just a reaching. "Okay," I told the being, my voice steadier than I felt. "Show me what's broken." I remember the way my hands shook when I first touched that living metal. It was warm, almost soft, and thrummed like a heartbeat under my palms. The alien sat, or maybe collapsed, a few feet away, eyes fixed on me, or through me. Every instinct screamed to get back in the truck and never look back. But something deeper, something I didn't know I still had, kept me there. I set my toolbox beside the wound in the ship and took a slow breath. "All right," I muttered. "Let's see what kind of mess you got yourself into." Talking out loud made it feel almost normal, like any other job. The being's gaze followed every movement of my hands. The wires, if they were wires, weren't copper or fiber. They were translucent threads that pulsed with light in uneven rhythms, like veins carrying life. When I reached toward them, I felt a surge of energy crawl up my arm, not painful, but alive. I yanked back out of reflex. My fingertips glowed faintly for a few seconds, tiny sparks dancing between them before fading. That's when the first image appeared, not in front of my eyes, but inside my head. It was my old soldering iron, glowing red, resting on the workbench in my garage. Then another image, the same tool sealing a broken thread of light inside this ship. It wasn't asking in words, it was showing me. The being needed help, and somehow it believed I could give it. So I did what any mechanic would. I started working. The strange cables emitted a low hum, and when I matched their vibrations, using a wrench handle to gently tap and test the tension, the hum stabilized. It was like tuning a guitar that sang in frequencies the ear couldn't hear, but the soul could feel. The creature closed its eyes, and the entire cabin filled with a faint amber glow, as if the ship itself sighed in relief. Every few minutes, I'd glance at the being. Its chest rose and fell slowly, its hands pressed against its side, where that silver fluid leaked. Without thinking, I tore a strip from my shirt and pressed it over the wound. The cloth absorbed the liquid and shimmered like mercury. When I pulled my hand away, the wound had already begun to seal, smooth, seamless. The ship pulsed once in rhythm, responding to the healing of its pilot. They were connected. Then something happened that still makes my stomach twist when I remember it. I felt a sudden warmth at the base of my skull, like invisible hands cupping my head. My surroundings blurred. The desert, the ship, even my body faded away. And in that emptiness I saw shapes, geometries made of light, spinning, folding into themselves like living equations. Each shape carried a feeling, sorrow, compassion, gratitude. It wasn't random. It was communication. Through that language of light, I began to understand pieces of its story. It had come from far beyond what we call stars, a place where light isn't just illumination, but consciousness. It wasn't lost, it was sent. And now, broken and stranded on our dust-colored planet, it reached out to the only creature nearby willing to listen. When my vision cleared, I was back in the cabin. My knees trembled, my shirt was drenched in sweat, but the hum of the ship had changed. It was steady now, smoother. I touched one of the repaired conduits, and the pulse inside matched my heartbeat. The being opened its eyes again, twin mirrors reflecting my face, and then I felt words, not heard them. Thank you for remembering what you are. I don't know what that meant. Maybe it was gratitude, maybe prophecy, but as soon as the message settled in my mind, the being reached out and placed its hand over mine. A jolt of warmth flooded my chest, and for a heartbeat I saw images. Not mechanical, but human. My mother's kitchen table, my father's Bible, the old church bell in Carson City. It was as if the creature had opened a door inside me I'd kept locked for 30 years. Then quietly, it withdrew its hand. The hum subsided to a whisper. The ship's lights dimmed until only the being's eyes glowed faintly in the dark. Rest, I said, voice barely steady. I think it's working again. But as I turned to leave, the being raised a trembling hand and pointed upward toward the open desert sky, where thunder rolled in silence and stars flickered like pulse points in a great living body. And that was when I realized this wasn't just a rescue, it was a summons. I didn't sleep that night. I sat outside the shop with my back against the pickup, the desert air cool against my skin, the stars sharp enough to cut glass. Every few minutes, the crater behind me pulsed faintly, a slow heartbeat of light rising from beneath the sand. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt like I'd stepped into a truth that had been waiting for me all my life. Around dawn, I went back to check on the ship. The being was still there, but the cabin had changed. The walls, once metallic, were now translucent like smoked glass, shifting colors with every breath I took, gold when I felt calm, violet when my pulse quickened. It was reading me, matching me, maybe even learning from me. When I touched the hull, the hum deepened and rolled through my body like a low note of a church organ. Suddenly, light poured out of the walls, not blinding but gentle, forming patterns in the air. Spirals, triangles, symbols I didn't recognize yet somehow understood. They pulsed in rhythm, and with each pulse, a feeling came with it. Not words, emotions. The first pattern glowed a deep blue. It felt like sorrow, ancient, endless sorrow, not for itself, but for us. Images flooded my mind, cities burning, children crying, oceans black with oil. The next light was gold, warm, forgiving. I felt tears in my eyes before I even realized I was crying. It wasn't showing me judgment, it was showing me empathy. I whispered, "You feel for us?" And though no sound came from the being, I felt an answer. "We remember what you forgot." That sentence, or thought, hit me harder than any sermon I'd ever heard. "What did we forget?" I asked. And the ship responded again, this time in waves of light that became images. I saw humanity from above. Not nations or borders, just millions of glowing souls, tiny sparks of the same light that filled the cabin, some dim, some bright, all connected. Then I saw something else. A man of light walking among them. He wasn't alien, he wasn't human, he was both. His face shimmered, but the eyes were unmistakable. Calm, loving. They looked like every image of Jesus I'd ever seen, and yet far beyond any painting or memory. When he lifted his hands, the sparks of light in humanity flickered brighter, as if answering him. The vision dissolved, and I stumbled backward, gasping. The being still watched me, its eyes reflecting a quiet sorrow. For the first time I understood. Or at least, I thought I did. This creature hadn't come to conquer or study. It had come to remind us. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my flashlight. "Why me?" I asked aloud. "Why show me this?" The answer came not from the being, but from the ship itself, a deep resonance in my chest, the words forming from within, "Because you fix what others throw away." And in that moment, I saw flashes of my life, the engines, the broken tools, the people I'd pushed away, the faith I'd abandoned after my mother died. I realized I'd spent years repairing machines because I couldn't repair myself. The ship's lights shifted to white, pure and blinding. My surroundings vanished, and I felt suspended in weightless silence. Then, from somewhere beyond the light came a sound. Not mechanical, not human, a chord so vast it made my bones tremble. It wasn't just heard. It was felt, like the hum of creation itself. And within that sound, a whisper. Every world knows the same song. When I opened my eyes again, I was kneeling in the sand outside the ship. The sun had risen. The air smelled of ozone and dust. The crater was quiet now, the ship's glow dimmed to a faint pulse. My hands still tingled with residual warmth, like static from touching heaven. I looked up at the sky, and for the first time in decades, I said a prayer out loud, not to ask for anything, just to say, "I remember." But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Something inside me had been rewired, tuned to a frequency I didn't understand yet. And whatever song that ship had started playing inside me, it wasn't finished. The night I entered the ship, the desert was utterly still. No wind, no coyotes, no far-off highway hum, just a silence so deep it felt alive. The craft rested in the crater like an enormous heart that had slowed to a calm, steady rhythm. Faint light pulsed along its seams, slow, deliberate, inviting. The being stood at the entrance, framed by the soft blue glow. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. I understood somehow that it wanted me to come inside. My boots crunched on the sand as I stepped closer. The air thickened, not heavy, but dense with energy. Each breath shimmered in my chest like breathing music. When I crossed the threshold, gravity seemed to let go of me. I floated, though my feet still brushed the floor. The space wasn't large, more like a cathedral shaped by light instead of stone. Columns of shifting color rose and fell, rippling through each other like water and flame. The air hummed, a tone so low and pure it made my ribs vibrate. The being turned toward me, and its form began to dissolve into threads of silver. For a moment, I panicked, thought it was dying. But then those threads stretched out and merged with the light itself. The whole chamber brightened until I could see nothing but white. And then everything stopped. There was no sound, no time, only presence. A figure emerged from that brilliance, human in shape, but far more than human. His eyes were the color of every sunrise I had ever seen, and when they met mine, the weight of every regret I'd ever carried fell away. He didn't glow like the being had. He was the light. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind screamed the name I hadn't said in 30 years, Jesus. He didn't answer in words. Instead, images filled my vision. Memories not just of my life, but of every life. Mothers weeping, soldiers praying, children laughing under broken roofs. Every joy, every sin, every forgiveness. All of it woven together by a single golden thread. And then I felt his voice, not in my ears, but in my bones. I am not from above or below. I am in all that is. My Father's house has many worlds. The chamber around us shifted. The walls became stars. Galaxies spiraled like grains of sand, blown by divine breath. And through it all, his light remained steady, reaching into every corner of creation. Tears floated from my eyes in weightless drops. "Why me?" I whispered. "I'm nobody, just a man with grease on his hands." He smiled, God, that smile, and the light pulsed warmer. You fix what others discard, so I showed you what can never be broken. A wave of emotion crushed through me. Love so vast it was painful. I saw every mistake I'd made, every harsh word, every lonely night, and none of it mattered anymore. It was forgiven, swallowed in light. I reached out without meaning to. My hand passed through his, and for a fraction of a second, I saw inside the light. Saw worlds upon worlds, beings of every form, all bound by the same melody. The sound returned then, that low chord I'd heard before, now richer, endless. It was the hum of the universe itself. The figure began to fade, the light softening like dusk. The last thing I felt was a whisper of warmth against my heart, and words that echoed without sound. Tell them I am still here. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was lying in the sand outside. The ship was closed again, its surface gleaming with quiet light. My tools were scattered nearby. The stars had shifted. Hours must have passed. The being was gone. I pressed my palm to the metal, and it pulsed once, slow, gentle, like a goodbye. Then the craft lifted silently into the air, leaving behind only a faint ring of scorched earth and a single shining fragment about the size of my thumb. I picked it up. It was warm. It still is. That night, I didn't just see something impossible. I met the reason faith exists. I woke up to sunlight cutting through the blinds of my small desert home. For a moment, I thought it had all been a dream. The ship, the light, the voice that called itself through every atom of my being. But then I saw it. The fragment. It lay on the nightstand beside my bed, glowing faintly in the early morning light. Not bright enough to hurt the eyes, just a soft gold pulse, beating in perfect rhythm with my heart. Every time it glowed, I felt warmth spread through my chest. Not physical warmth, but the kind that comes when a man who's been lost for too long suddenly remembers the road home. I sat there for a long time, staring at it, afraid to touch it, afraid of what it might do, or what it might mean. When I finally reached out, the hum started again, that same deep vibration that I'd felt under the desert floor. It wasn't sound, it was communication, a message not meant for ears, but for the soul. And just like before, images began to unfold inside my mind, but this time they weren't of other worlds or beings. They were ours. I saw Earth from space, fragile, glowing, wrapped in ribbons of light that I somehow knew were prayers, hopes, and dreams. Then the image descended through clouds, showing moments of mercy. A nurse holding a dying man's hand, a child sharing bread with a stranger, a priest kneeling in an empty church, whispering forgiveness to no one and to everyone at once. And then I heard it, a whisper, not from the fragment, not from outside, but from within me. The universe doesn't worship me in one language, it worships me in light. The voice was the same one I had heard in the ship, the voice of Jesus, calm and endless. What you saw was not a vision, David. It was remembrance. You belong to creation, and creation belongs to me. Tears blurred my sight. I pressed the fragment to my chest and felt its hum synchronize with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Why show me this? Why not the world? Why a man who could barely fix his own life? But all I felt in return was a quiet certainty, like the kind you feel when a storm passes and the air smells clean again. Because the world does not listen to those who shout, he said. It listens to those who repair. That line sank into me deeper than any sermon. My whole life, I'd repaired broken machines, transmissions, alternators, busted fuel lines, but I'd never once believed I could fix a soul, least of all my own. Yet now I understood. Maybe that was what I had been built for all along. The fragment flashed again, and this time I saw faces, countless faces, men, women, children of every color and shape. Each had a small light glowing inside their chest. Some shone bright, others barely flickered, but all of them were connected by invisible strands of gold, forming one immense network of living light across the earth. The voice came again, softer now. There is no faith too small, no world too far. The light within you is the same that burns in the stars. Remember that and tell them. Then the glow faded. The fragment turned cold in my hand, just a dull piece of metal now. Or maybe it only appeared dull to my eyes. I sat there until the sun climbed high over the desert, lighting the red hills outside my window. For the first time in years, I wanted to pray. Not because I was afraid, but because I was grateful. I didn't know if anyone would believe me. Maybe they'd call me crazy or drunk or desperate for attention, but none of that mattered. The truth was simple. I had met something not of this world, and in its presence, I had found the heart of my own faith again. That was the message. Not about aliens or miracles or cosmic power. It was about connection, the divine pulse that ties every living being, from the dust under my boots to the stars above my roof, back to the same source. And that pulse, I realized, never stops. 3 days passed before I found the courage to go back. The desert had a way of erasing things, footprints, tire tracks, even memories. Sometimes I wondered if it had erased me a little too. But when dawn broke on that third morning, I packed my old pickup with a canteen, a shovel, and the fragment that still faintly glowed in my pocket, and I drove back toward the wash. The road was silent, except for the hum of the engine and the faint vibration under my seat, like the earth itself remembered something buried deep beneath it. I knew the exact spot. I could have found it blindfolded. When I arrived, the crater was still there, but smaller. The edges had collapsed inward, as if the desert wanted to heal the wound. I stepped out of the truck and stood on the rim, staring down. The ship was gone. No metal, no light, just sand, scorched black in places where nothing should have burned. My stomach sank. Part of me had hoped it would still be there, some proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But then I saw something that made my heart stop. Right in the center of the crater, half buried in the sand, was a circle of glass, perfectly smooth, about the size of a table. Beneath it, faint light pulsed, slow and alive, just like the fragment in my pocket. I knelt beside it and pressed my palm against the surface. It was warm, not sun-warm, living warm. When I did, the hum returned, deep and resonant, vibrating through my bones. And then the world around me dissolved. The desert vanished, replaced by blackness, dotted with starlight. I floated weightless, surrounded by thousands of orbs of golden light, drifting like lanterns in an infinite sea. Each orb flickered, and when I focused, I saw memories inside, moments of love, of courage, of pain. Not mine, theirs, humanity's. I saw a soldier holding his dying friend's hand in the mud, a mother forgiving the man who had taken her son, a child praying for rain. Every act of compassion, every breath of hope, glowing brighter than all the galaxies I'd ever imagined. And then, at the center of it all, a figure stood, neither alien nor human, but the same being of light I had seen in the ship. His eyes burned with mercy. His voice, when it came, was quieter than my heartbeat. "David," he said, "they will not believe what you saw." But faith was never built on proof. The stars pulsed as he spoke. "Tell them that we are not alone, because no one has ever been alone. Every world I have made sings the same song. You have heard a verse of it. Now carry it." When the vision faded, I was back on the sand, my hands still pressed to the glass. My eyes burned and the smell of ozone lingered in the air. I realized I'd been crying, not out of fear, but awe. I whispered, "I'll tell them," though my voice trembled. "But they'll laugh at me." The hum deepened once, almost like a heartbeat in reply. Then it stopped. The glass dimmed and cooled under my hand. I stood up, brushed the sand from my jeans, and looked out across the empty desert. The sun was rising behind the mountains, painting everything in gold and red. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small beneath it. I felt connected. When I climbed back into the truck, the radio, dead for months, crackled to life on its own. Static filled the cab. Then a voice came through. Not a station, not words I could recognize. It was that same chord I'd heard in the ship, the hum of creation, faint and fading. I pulled the fragment from my pocket. It glowed softly, pulsing in time with the sound, and I knew the being hadn't left anything behind by accident. It had left me a reminder, a key. As I drove away, I looked once more in the mirror at the empty horizon. The desert shimmered, waves of heat rising like breath. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shape, tall, luminous, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. Still, I smiled, because deep inside, I could feel it. The light was still there. The message was alive. And it was only the beginning. It started small, a flicker in the lights when I walked into the garage, the hum of machines changing pitch when I passed by. The air around me sometimes carrying that faint metallic scent, ozone and rain, like the night everything began. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nerves, exhaustion, maybe even trauma. But deep down, I knew better. Once you've stood inside the light, once you've heard the hum that holds the universe together, there's no going back to pretending you don't feel it. The fragment was still with me. I kept it in a small box on my workbench, wrapped in a rag of old denim. Every night, after closing the shop, I'd take it out and hold it in my palm. Sometimes it was dull, like a dead ember. Other times it glowed faintly, pulsing with that steady rhythm, my rhythm. Then the dreams began. The first one came 3 nights after I returned from the crater. I was standing on a vast plain under a black sky filled with stars. The stars began to move, spinning in slow, deliberate circles, forming constellations I'd never seen. Each constellation pulsed like a heartbeat, and between them appeared faces. People I'd never met, their expressions calm, waiting. Then a light rose from the horizon, so bright it painted the stars white. Out of that brilliance stepped the being, the same one I had helped, but now surrounded by thousands of others, each shimmering like glass reflecting a sunrise. They stood in silence until a single voice spoke, not from one, but from all of them. The bridge has begun. When I woke, my room was glowing faintly gold. The fragment pulsed on the nightstand, though I hadn't touched it. After that, the signs began to follow me into the waking world. I'd walk into town for groceries, and people would stop mid-conversation, staring at me as though they'd forgotten what they were saying. Streetlights flickered overhead when I passed beneath them. Radios hissed into static before clearing again, sometimes whispering my name in between frequencies. Once, while fixing an old Chevy for a customer, the engine stalled 3 times. The 3rd time, when I turned the key, the ignition hummed in perfect harmony with the same tone I'd heard inside the ship. I froze, my hand on the key, heart pounding. The radio, dead for years, turned on by itself and played a single chord, long, low, resonant, the same chord from the light. It wasn't just machines. People began to appear, strangers who somehow knew me. A woman came by the shop one afternoon, claiming she'd dreamed of a man surrounded by golden light, holding something that beat like a heart of heaven. She said she'd driven 200 miles because the dream told her to. When she saw the fragment on my workbench, she fell to her knees and whispered, "It's real." I didn't know what to tell her. I barely knew what to tell myself. That night, I walked into the desert again, fragment in hand, looking for answers. I stood where the crater had been, But the sand was smooth now, undisturbed. The stars above shimmered like molten silver, and the wind carried a sound, not words, but a vibration I could feel deep inside my chest. Then the sky flashed, just once, and from somewhere far above, a single streak of blue light crossed the heavens and vanished over the mountains. At that moment, I knew it wasn't finished. The being hadn't shown me the light just for me to keep it hidden. The message, whatever it truly was, wanted to move, to live, to spread, and the universe had chosen a broken-down mechanic to carry it. I laughed out loud, half in fear, half in awe. "Why me?" I shouted into the wind. "You could have picked a priest, a scientist, a prophet, and why me?" The answer came not in thunder, not in vision, but in silence. And in that silence, I felt the truth rise within me. Because you still listen. When I returned home, the lights inside the shop glowed on their own, though the power was off. They pulsed gently, once, twice, in the same rhythm as my heartbeat. Then darkness returned. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the doorway of my workshop, looking out over the endless desert, the fragment warm in my palm. Somewhere, beyond the horizon, I felt the hum again. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. The ship was calling. I don't remember deciding to leave. One morning I simply woke up knowing that I had to go. The air itself seemed to whisper now. I packed nothing but water, a flashlight, and the fragment. It was pulsing more brightly than ever, steady, urgent, alive. The desert stretched out before me like an ocean of rust and silence. I walked for hours, guided by instinct more than direction. The farther I went, the quieter the world became. Even the wind refused to disturb whatever waited ahead. By late afternoon, the horizon shimmered with a strange mirage, a soft glow hovering just above the sand. At first, I thought it was heat haze, but as I drew closer, I recognized the rhythm of its light. It was the same pulse as the fragment in my hand. I stopped and took a deep breath. "I'm here," I said aloud, though my voice trembled. The light answered. It spread across the desert floor like liquid gold, weaving intricate patterns around me. The ground hummed under my boots, and in an instant, gravity loosened its hold. I was lifted gently into the air, not pulled, not forced, just invited. The glow enveloped me completely, and once again, I was inside the heart of that living light. This time, there was no ship, no walls, no separation between what was me and what was everything else. The stars were within arm's reach, and when I looked at them, I saw faces, human and not, countless forms of life across an endless creation, all made from the same luminous essence. Then I heard the voice. Not loud, but everywhere. Not male or female, not alien or human. Simply truth. "David, the bridge is complete." From the brilliant stepped the being I had once saved, radiant and whole. But now, as it approached, its form began to change, merging into the familiar figure of the man of light, Jesus, until both were one and the same. The alien and the divine, united in perfect harmony. I fell to my knees, or whatever passed for knees in that place. My heart ached with awe. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Are you the same?" He smiled, the same calm, human smile I'd seen in my vision. "Everything that loves is part of the same light. You saw one face of what never ends." The realization struck me like thunder, wrapped in peace. The being I'd helped hadn't been separate from God. It had been sent by Him, a reflection of the same divine intelligence that breathed life into humanity. We were not alone in the universe, because God was never confined to one world. "You called to me," he said, his voice like sunlight through water, and I answered, in the only language you still trusted. Machines, light, repair. You fixed what was broken, and in doing so, remembered how to believe. I felt tears, real or not I couldn't tell, stream down my face. Why show me this? What am I supposed to do? The light around me deepened into gold and red, like the last rays of sunset. Tell them, he said, not to fear what they don't understand. Tell them that faith is not blind, it's the act of seeing with the heart. Tell them I am in the stars as surely as I am in their prayers. The glow intensified until I could no longer distinguish myself from it. I felt every heartbeat on earth, every cry, every laugh, every whispered prayer. The universe itself pulsed like one living organism, and I was part of it. And then, as suddenly as it began, it was gone. I woke up lying in the sand, the stars sharp above me. The fragment lay on my chest, completely still, no hum, no light, just a small piece of metal, cold and silent. But I knew the silence wasn't emptiness. It was completion. The bridge had been built. When I stood, I saw something on the horizon, a faint streak of blue light vanishing into the sky, as if the ship were departing for the last time. I raised my hand in farewell, not with sadness, but gratitude. Today, I keep the fragment in my pocket. It no longer glows, but sometimes when I touch it, I feel a faint heartbeat. Maybe it's mine. Maybe it's something greater. People still ask me if I truly believe it happened. I tell them it doesn't matter. What matters is that for one night, I saw the face of God in the stars, and he looked back at me. And when I close my eyes, I still hear his voice. Every world knows the same song. You just remembered the tune.